Hi, I'm Joe Garrett, and welcome to Games First's video review for the Crysis 2 multiplayer. It is starting to become commonplace in today's market for two different developers to make the single player and the multiplayer aspects of the same game separately. And although Crytek UK now falls under the same name as the main German-based company, can these ex-Free Radical developers, who created the now legendary Timesplitter series, live up to the huge expectations that have been placed on them by critics and fans alike? Crysis 2 is certainly not lacking in content. With 12 maps, 6 game modes, and a wealth of guns and abilities, there is certainly plenty to keep gamers occupied for a long time. Not only is Crysis 2's content plentiful, but in most regards, it is of an extremely high quality. While Crysis 2 features all of your standard free-for-all, team deathmatch, capture and hold, and capture the flag game types, the game's original assault and extraction game types help to add some variety to the mix. There are also game modifiers that allow you to search for the precise type of lobby that you're after. Whether you're after a game without any squads, shorter intervals between games, no nanosuit powers, or realistic damage, the game's got you covered. And while this fine-tuning is great for now, I fear that in the future it may be spreading itself slightly too thin, so it could take a while to find games when the online activity has subsided. All of these game types and search options would however mean nothing without good locations to play them on. Luckily, the game's 12 maps delivers just that. With a good variety of sizes and layouts set in interesting New York-based locations, the maps are one of the game's multiplayer's strongest points. The maps have all been designed with the game's unique style of gameplay in mind, with plenty of verticality for players to jump around on, flanking routes for stealthy players, open areas for snipers, and small enclosed spaces for intense close-quarter battles. The map's geometry and how players utilise it often ends up being the deciding factor in games. However, the first thing to strike you about the maps is simply how beautiful they look. Although you won't experience any of the same jaw-dropping set pieces from the campaign, the game's graphics and multiplayer are some of the best I've seen on a console. And although in certain sections I believe they went a little too far, so that the maps look cluttered and sometimes unclear, it is still hard to not be taken aback by the detail and scale that's on display. However, all of this beauty does come at a cost. During my time playing, I have encountered several graphical glitches and gameplay bugs, and while these are mainly cosmetic issues, such as animation oddities or soft textures, they can sometimes directly affect gameplay by blocking your view or restricting player movement. I have also had occasions where I couldn't even fire my weapon, and one game on Capture the Relay where I was unable to pick up the enemy's relay for an entire round. While these major issues are rare enough to not cause too much upset, the minor bugs such as glitchy kill replays that occur almost every single game do detract from the game's overall polish. Probably some of these bugs will be patched post-release, although others are the same that I've encountered during the beta and the demo, so I believe that they are simply going to remain as part of the game. Despite the occasional hiccup here and there, the game's multiplayer is usually a blast to play. The game's nanosuit that grants the player super speed, strength, cloak and armour abilities really dictates how the game is played, and adds more variety to the genre's usual aim, shoot, kill playstyle. The game's nanosuit adds a level of tactical depth that requires time and patience to learn when to utilise the suit's different functions. Rarely has a game made me feel more badass than when I'm sliding along the ground spraying bullets into my opponents, or by killing someone by booting a yellow cab into them from across the street. And it's moments such as these that makes Crysis 2 stand out from other shooters. Few other games give you such a crazy arsenal of abilities and equipment while allowing the game to remain fair and balanced. And Crysis 2 is fair and balanced. Well, usually at least. I haven't noticed any overpowered weapons or equipment, but the game's spawning system and certain abilities have caused me some grief. And the ability to go cloaked at any moment during a game can be great fun for players who like to play their game stealthily. However, players sitting in corners cloaked with a shotgun and simply waiting for people to walk into the room that they're in can be infuriating to play against. And certain abilities such as the proximity alarm seem to be just a little bit too good, to the point where I feel disadvantaged using anything else. And the spawning system, while not awful, does still have the tendency to spawn you next to opponents on occasion. And during team objective game types, spawn points are scattered around the map, rather than putting teams together in their bases. And while all of this doesn't ruin matches, it can still lead to a few unfair deaths. Gameplay is also enhanced by a series of abilities, weapons, gun attachments, and various equipment that is all unlocked as you progress through the game's ranking system. The game's method for unlocking these items, as well as many of the other game's aspects, all seem to have been lifted directly from the Call of Duty handbook. The game's custom classes setup almost feels identical, and although it is expected for games to replicate the best aspects from other games in the genre, when it is copied so strictly, it is hard for a game to add any innovation. Although the setup is familiar, the content largely feels fresh. The player has a choice of 3 different suit modules that grant the player a variety of different abilities, such as the always useful proximity alarm, the devastating air stomp, or the interesting threat tracer that colours an enemy's bullet trail bright green so you can easily identify a target's location. These abilities add another level to the game's depth by allowing players to fine-tune their setup to their particular playstyle.
He's down!
The sound in Crysis 2 manages to deliver at a level that matches the game's visuals in terms of excellence. Everything sounds like it should, and the more futuristic sci-fi sounding effects really help to set the game's tone. Although while in-game Crysis 2 sounds great, I have had issues with the background music during menus and the loading screens, simply being way too loud. Although it may be a relatively minor issue, when I am having to continually turn my volume up and down between games, it can become slightly frustrating. In conclusion, Crysis 2's multiplayer manages to bring enough new ideas to the genre to carve out its own niche in the market. And while some bugs and balancing issues hold it back from taking any of the first-person shooter juggernaut spots, Crysis 2 has more than enough good qualities to earn itself a place in your game's collection.
Now that's exactly how I like to win, by a mile.